Hey everybody, Larry, Fort Worth Memories Museum and Group, and all of our groups. It's Tuesday, it's 10 o'clock, and Rick and Mary have a special guest.
Good morning, Larry.
How are y'all?
We're doing good. Our special guest today is Colonel Jackie Vaughn, retired U.S. Air Force. And Jackie went from being a plowboy to being a flyboy.
Wow.
So welcome to the Hometown Heroes, Jackie.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Well,
Thank you.
We're glad to have you. Mary, how are you today?
I'm great.
You been busy?
I've been very busy.
You thought after you got your finals done
Yeah,
in school, that'd be it.
Yeah,
But
it eased up a little bit, but then we did the May 11th trip to the Capitol.
how many World War II vets did you take to the Capitol?
We had 8. Roll call had 8. There were 16 total. So we had, of the 16, 50% were roll call veterans. So that was pretty cool.
That's good.
Yeah. And nice turnout for the folks there. The Senator Tan Parker did the proclamation on the floor of the Senate. And then each of the senators, the state senators that were associated with the veterans, then had their bios, and they got up and they spoke a little bit about each of the folks
Wow.
that was there. And there's some, even our own roll call vets, there's some stories that even our roll call folks don't know, because some of these guys just don't really want to talk. But we had their bios on paper, and so we were able to share those. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then they did a lunch afterwards. And then we obviously got those guys home. And then Saturday was Don's
All day birthday
All-day
celebration.
birthday.
Yeah.
So yeah, we did the drive-through thing past his house first thing in the morning. Well, we're not really first.
How did
thing,
that
but
go? Was it a lot of people?
It was quite a few. It was not as many as
It's
during
COVID.
the COVID times, but it was still quite a few people. There was a little threat of bad weather,
Yes.
earlier.
Yeah.
Everyone thought it was going to rain all day, so we were really concerned. One, that it might rain. So I got to Don's house early. We got a big canopy up and got him where he'd be covered under that if it did rain. But still had a pretty good showing. And
Good.
thanks to Jimmy Polizani and Cafe Republic for their spearheading that. They even brought along a couple of the newer police vehicles. And so a lot of Don's great-grandkids were there, and they took them in the car.
Did they really?
And they showed them all the technology and all the bells and whistles. It was really cool.
That's super.
Yeah, it was really neat. So the Fort Worth PD did that. And then that afternoon, we set up the party at 54th Street for 2 to 5 p.m. And of course, I got there at 1 to start getting stuff done with Bethany, and Bethany was already there. And Don was already there. So, because he goes there whenever he's bored and he don't want to sit around at home, he'll go to 54th Street or tap in. So he's already there. So we finally got everything set up, and it was just packed all afternoon.
That's
and Don
good.
sang some songs, including a couple of Irish songs. So
Wow.
he was having a good time. And I left just before 5 o'clock, and he was still there. And a few
Going
people were
strong.
still there, but he left a little bit after that. So I'm sure he was pretty exhausted. And that night, our community salutes held an event.
That's right.
And Don didn't go to that this year, but we had a few roll call folks. Judy Chota, board member, and a few other folks were there from roll call to go support those young men and women enlisting in the military for before their send off to basic training. Yeah, so
Busy week.
busy.
Jackie, you weren't doing any oath of enlistment for anybody, were you?
No, I haven't done that in a while.
Okay. Well, tell us about your plowboy days. You grew up in a farm,
Well,
on a farm.
I grew up in a farm, on a farm, about 45 miles northeast of McKinney, a little place called Bailey, Texas. And my dad was a sharecropper. He couldn't read and write. He couldn't sign a check until he was 55 years old, or 60 almost. And my mom was able to teach him. But he worked our grandparents' land, and he rented some other land. And by the time I was 12, we worked together. We made 50 cents an hour. 10 hours a day was $5 a piece.
Wow.
And by the time I was 15, it was up to 75 cents an hour. And that's when I decided that I was going to do something besides work the farm.
Well, what kind of crops did you have?
We had cotton.
Okay.
We had cotton, a little bit of corn,
Okay.
but we only did about 80 acres total, something like that. So that wasn't really enough. So we had to work out some too. And we did it with a bee farm maul. You only see those in museums anymore. And it was just a 2-row cultivator. And it was pretty primitive, but it was better.
You learned how to work on a tractor, didn't you?
I did that a little bit.
Yeah.
But had a large family where I was a blended family. My mother and dad had both been married before. My mother had 4 by her first husband before he died, and my dad had 10.
Ooh.
So that was 14.
There's a pretty big age range, wasn't there?
They was my mother had twins at home at age 15 when I was born, and my dad had a 15 and 16-year-old still at home. By the time I was 2 or 3 years old, they were gone, and so I don't have any memory of anybody being at home, but I do know that several of them had children older than me.
And that I went to Beaver's Bend one time and went with Patriot Anglers up to the fly shop and posted some pictures and posted a picture of Coach, the owner of the fly shop. And he said, "That's my nephew." And I thought, "We're about the same age or pretty close." And so then you explained it to me. And
Eddie was my sister's son that lived 5 miles away, and he was 11 months younger. We went to high school together, had some classes together, played sports together, and he went on to be a coach. And then when he retired, they did the fly shop at Beaver's Bend. And unfortunately, he passed about 2 years ago with COVID. But they have a VRBO place up there that they always donate to the Patriot Anglers and have for years.
They do. They're great supporters of veterans up there. So.
His wife Berta
Yep.
is still running the shop, and it's actually expanded in the last 2 years. She's got a really, really good business.
That's good. But that's kind of a tie that we had just out of the blue one time. But whenever you were growing up on the farm, did you have like indoor plumbing then?
We didn't have indoor plumbing. We lived on my grandfather's place till I was 10, and did not. We moved into town, the big town of Bailey, which was a mile away, population of about 300 or less. And we moved a house in. My dad bought a house, moved it in. And I was 12 before we had indoor plumbing.
Because back then, that was in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't uncommon for people to have an outdoor privy, to have an outhouse.
Wasn't uncommon at all.
Yeah, because I had some relatives, and when we go see them, we had to go to the bathroom. We had to go out in the back of the property to the outhouse, and I thought, man, this is
wasn't any different for me. But I learned a lot from my parents. My dad was a proud man. He may not could read and write, but he could figure as well as anybody. He could do carpenter work. Numbers was not a problem for him, even though he only got to the 3rd grade. But my mother could read and write and everything. But Dad was a cotton ginner in the fall, and normally would work in our area till it was gone. And he'd go out to Midland and work for about 6 weeks and crops out there, and then come home. And he did carpenter work when he wasn't farming.
And you worked on the farm all through high school, or?
I worked on the farm till I was about 15, and I started finding other jobs, the service station job, hauling hay, doing something besides picking cotton and hoeing cotton. I've still got my cotton sack cotton sack that my mother made for me, and it's been folded for a long time and will stay that way. But when I at the end of my high school years, I got a job at a lumber yard, and it was located in Leonard, Texas, just down the road. But the owner of it had 2 large yards in Terrell, Texas. So at the age of 16, turning 17, I went and lived in Terrell for 3 months in the summer, lived in a hotel and worked for the lumber guy.
Can you imagine kids doing that now?
No, nobody would even think.
I was 16 and I lived in a 4-story hotel on the corner of Highway 34 and 80. But I learned a lot, and I went back because I didn't know if I was going to get to go to college at the time or not. And he was training me to be a manager of one of his yards because he was a wholesale lumber guy that owned 2 yards there, and then he had acquired some more because of business. But my third year that I went back was between my freshman and sophomore year of college, living in the same hotel. He paid my room and gave me $3 a day for food, which I could buy a meal. I could buy breakfast at that time for 99 cents. And, things, this was, in, this was in 70, somewhere. No, I got married in 69. So this was 67, 68, somewhere in there. And, so when I got there in my third year, he said, hey, there's an opening down at the funeral home. And I'll go ahead and pay you room and board, but if you work there, they board you in a little apartment next to the office. So I went down and I ended up taking that job every other week. I worked 55 hours at the lumber yard and some weeks 50 hours at the funeral home.
My goodness.
You
didn't get in any trouble, did you?
Well,
Not
never
much.
did get any sleep.
My hours were 7 to 5 at the lumber yard and 6 to 6 at the funeral home.
Oh my.
Now that's when I only worked from 6 in the evening till 10 if there was someone there, put on a suit and viewing things. But the interesting part was back then all of the EMTs were funeral homes.
Yeah, with funeral homes.
And so I was on call throughout the night, and sometimes I almost got one call somewhere during the night, every night, and sometimes 2 or 3, and that's when I didn't get much sleep.
To make either hospital runs,
or
pick up.
There was a state
body.
hospital in Terrell, so we made several hospital runs there for the deceased, and then we did all of the accidents and anything that needed an ambulance. We were the only one available.
How old were you?
At that time, I had turned 18 at that time.
Wow.
What a job.
And
Wow,
now, but
responsibility.
it was unique in the sense that when the phone rang, I let it ring until it quit. And then when it quit, I picked up the phone because it transferred to one of the morticians who were the EMTs. And so I listened to where it was going, and then I would have either the vehicle for the ambulance to make the ambulance run or the vehicle for a death pickup. I would have it ready and going by the time they got there. They only lived 5 minutes away or so. So that's, and then I worked every other weekend, Saturday and Sunday. So those were the weekends that I put in those were the weeks I put in a lot of hours.
And you were able to go to college from there.
I was, that was my first year of college. And so I was able to go because I funded myself. I had a brother that paid my tuition for my first semester, and the rest of it was on my own. And I lived at home until we got married in 69. And I've been married 54 years to my wife, Nita.
And Nita, is she from the same town?
She's from just north of Bonham.
Okay.
I was just south of Bonham.
Okay.
So she's from the same area.
And how did you go from college? Were you interested in going to the Air Force? Or?
Well, I was in 4-year ROTC.
Okay.
But I had no intention of flying. I'd never been in an airplane, never looked at instruments in an airplane. So when I took the AFOQT, you had to tell what the airplanes were doing off the dials and the instruments. I had no clue. So I passed everything but the flying part. And so I was going to be a personnel officer. And then my sophomore year, going into my junior year, they said, well, hey, you can take the test again if you like. And since you've never been in an airplane, we'll go put you in one and show you. Then I passed without a problem. And then I went into college pilot training. It was called FIP or something like that, flight instructor program that they had. And I got my license, my start of my senior year. And that was a big accomplishment for me, coming from the field to get to fly an airplane.
I bet it was.
Yeah, for
And-
sure.
And then you went into the Air Force.
I went straight into the Air Force. I graduated on 22nd of May or something like that, and I had a 2 June report date to Columbus, Mississippi,
Okay. Is that you went to Columbus for your
for my
officer training?
no
or for
my
your-
undergraduate. I was when I
Okay.
graduated. When you graduate from ROTC, you get commissioned,
Okay.
and so I went there already as a second lieutenant, and I flew they call it 52 weeks of training, and
That's where you were flying the
that's
two-seat jet. We got
that's
some
where
pictures of that.
I flew the T-33 first, and then the T-38. I think
How did that feel to go from flying in a prop airplane that you did in college when you were working on your
I flew a 150 actually,
okay.
about the
That's
smallest
pretty small.
Cessnas
You
you
can't
can
get
get.
much smaller than that to go from there into a jet.
Well, it was
was that kind of exciting?
it was exciting, kind of a rush for me, and of course when you start out, you're behind it for
Yeah.
a while,
Yeah.
and you're always playing catch up. But the T-33 was the small. It was made by Cessna actually, side by side. And then when I went into the T-38 made by Northrop, it was the most fun airplane for me. Some people like the other airplane, but I liked it. It just fit me better, and I really enjoyed the T-38.
And so you were already married.
I was married my end of my junior year, or actually in November of my junior year. So I did that, and then my senior year.
How long have you been married? You said that
50,
was
almost 54 years.
okay. That's a while.
That's a long
That's a
time.
long while.
And there's a picture we have of Nita and you. That's at your graduation,
Mhm.
and she's with child.
That's right. She's about 5 months pregnant.
Okay.
And then we went from there to Little Rock Air Force Base. She went with me until about, 3 weeks or so before delivery. She moved back home with her mom. And then my son was born after I graduated from C-130 school at Little Rock.
So you went from that was going to be your primary aircraft. the
Primary
C-130.
C-130. And I went through my checkout in the 130 at Little Rock. It's about a 3-month program. And then from there, I came home scheduled to leave mid-September. And my son was due in 4 or 5 days. So they gave me a 10-day extension. And he was 6 days old when I left for Vietnam.
Okay. And whenever you left, you didn't fly a C-130 over
No,
there. I mean,
no,
you just got one when you got there.
I had a strange experience. We took off on about the 30th of September or so, whatever it was, on a C5. And as normal, it wasn't uncommon for a C5 to break.
Yeah, they
The-
break everywhere.
the
especially
nose-
Hawaii.
The nose gear didn't come up, so we came back to Travis. Took me 3 days to get out of Travis, and we had to take an airplane by way of Kadena, and we were only supposed to have a 5-hour layover. Well, when we got there, there was 8 or 9 of us, and they only had room for 5 on the airplane that was scheduled. So we had to stay 3 more days.
Took you a while to get to Vietnam.
Had to stay there, so we went downtown and had a little R&R before I ever got to Vietnam. And then we went on to Philippines for survival school, and got to spend another 4 or 5 days after that before I could get on to Taiwan, which was my primary base was CCK Taiwan.
So you were flying out of Taiwan into
Flying
Vietnam?
out of Taiwan into Vietnam. There wasn't any C-130s permanently stationed in Vietnam except at either U Dorn or U Ban, and they were special ops.
How long's that flight?
It was about, if I recall, maybe 7 hours, something
But
like that.
whenever you go to Vietnam, you'd stay a little while, and
We'd go routinely. Well, there was forward operating bases at Saigon and at Utapao when I first got there, and you went to one or the other. And there was always a large presence of C-130s there, and but everybody was TDY from Taiwan to there, and some would stay a month, most of the crew members were in and out in 20, 21 days. We would go, and there was, we would rotate. The airplanes would stay for a plane load of people, and there'd be 8 or 10 crews along with maintenance and other people that would fly home on what we call a rotator, and
fly home to Taiwan.
And we were typically home 4 or 5 days, and then we were back in country.
What kind of missions did you do?
We did mainly what we call beans and bullets. That was where you just haul supplies and ammunition for the fighters, bomb loads. We also carried a lot of people toward the end of the war. I had one flight that had 165 Vietnamese on it.
My goodness.
And that was when we were trying to evacuate them out.
Whenever you would take these supplies, would you drop them, or would you?
No, we would typically land and
load.
We did some airdrops, but I only had probably a half a dozen missions that we actually airdropped into. But we'd go into the forward operating bases, and a lot of the bases were made out of what we call PSP. They were metal plating that made the runway out of, and we had to be careful not to go in too early, because when they're wet, you couldn't stop. And we had that problem when during the POW exchange. I went in 72, 73. So I was at the very end. I was there when the bombing was taken. I was actually in Utapao for about 20 days when the B-52s made their strikes over Hanoi. And some of them obviously didn't make it back. So it was kind of a solemn time then. And I was actually at Clark, Philippines on a rotator going back to CCK in Taiwan when the first C9 came in with the very first POWs. And I'm telling you, it's still touching for me today when I see it on the news, when they do a flashback as a, anniversary.
So you
or
were
something.
there watching them.
I was at Clark. We landed for fuel, and then they put us on an hour hold. Said we got a VIP airplane coming in, and we didn't know what it was until it landed. And these guys stepped off on. It wasn't U.S. soil, but it was a U.S.
Close
airbase.
enough.
The next best thing.
It was an airbase.
So you said the POW exchange. Were you taking some Vietnamese?
We were taking North Vietnamese from South Vietnamese down on the coast at what they call the tiger cages. We were taking those up to a location north of Saigon and offloading them as a POW exchange.
You didn't fly into North Vietnam.
I was scheduled once to go in to pick up, but weather or maintenance or something canceled us. So I never actually got to go pick up any of our folks, because they were actually, they didn't come out in C-130s, but we took support equipment in for the airplanes that were going in, to bring them out.
So were all those POWs that you took, not all of them were alive, were they?
Those POWs, they were alive,
but
but that's the first time I ever saw anybody with leprosy.
Wow.
We actually had people wrapped up in stuff that had all kinds of diseases from being captive, and they weren't taken very, they weren't maintained very well. And but one of the most unique things for me as a young lieutenant was I never really spent Christmas Day away from my wife and family. And Christmas Day in 72, we were carrying KIAs from Nha Trang back to Saigon.
Vietnamese.
Vietnamese. They weren't ours. They were Vietnamese. They were South Vietnamese, but we were taking them back to Saigon, and they didn't have refrigeration units. They were in quatsi huts with a plastic bag packed in sand, and then in a box. And so we made 3 trips on on Christmas Day, and then the same thing on New Year's Day.
Mm.
And that was
It's a smell you won't forget.
that was kind of a hard thing for me. You know, here I am Christmas Day, and that's what I'm doing.
Mm.
But that's just part of the job.
While you were there, did you have some of your fellow pilots that got lost? I mean, got killed?
In the C-130s, I got there in 1st of October. Well, in that summer, during the last Tet Offensive, we'd lost 2 C-130s, and that we lost the airplanes and crews. And then we had one that crash landed, and you know, they were okay. But that was the last of the Tet Offensive. And while I was there, we didn't lose any of our crew members in Vietnam. But I did, on my trek that I just talked about, going from Travis Air Force Base to the Philippines, we had a flight surgeon that I'd got to know real well. We all went through our training and our episodes in Tokyo and in the Philippines. He went on to Vaughn or Udon, I can't remember which, flying F-4s. He was back, you know, he was a flight surgeon, but they got flying time. I stopped in to see him about 3 months after I'd got there, and only to find out that he was MIA.
Mm.
He had flown to Nha Trang from either Ubon or Udorn, whichever one it was. It's been too long. And they think they hit a mountain on approach. And so he's one that's listed as MIA. And, you know, he became a real good friend. And he was the only flight surgeon that was lost for the Air Force in Vietnam.
Wow.
Wow.
So
after Vietnam, did you get out of the Air Force then, or?
After Vietnam, I came back to Little Rock Air Force Base for 4 years. And I was in the what they call the tactical schoolhouse, and so I had to get enough time to become an aircraft commander and instructor. And then my last 2 years, I was instructor and then a flight evaluator at the schoolhouse, training what I had done the year and a half before. And then we were training some Air Guard folks that were just getting the C-130, and I was coerced to check into the Guard. And when I served my 6 years at the time, I actually got out about three months early, and I transitioned straight into the Air Guard at St. Joe, Missouri.
Okay.
And I was there for 7 years.
I think we got 2 pictures, Ty, that one shows you as a lieutenant in front of a C-130 at the door. Another one's when you're lieutenant colonel. So
That's right. That's when I was first was in Vietnam, second time in Desert Storm.
okay.
It's the same shoulder holster with a different gun,
Yeah.
because we had a 38 and went to the 9mm. But it's I've matured a little bit between the two.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit. So whenever you went into the Guard in Missouri, then you helped set up a school, didn't you?
The at the time there was not. I'd already flown. Well, I'd flown the C-130E model, okay, which was made in the 60s, and that's what I flew at Little Rock. What I flew in Vietnam. Came back to what I flew at Little Rock again until I'd been there. Well, in 75, I flew to Marietta, Georgia with our Chief of Staff Val and General Coverdale. Picked up the first H model that the Air Force got from, received from Lockheed. And then those are the airplanes that we flew from then on. So I flew the E model and then the H model.
And whenever they have these model changes like that, it's not like, hey, we just got new fenders and some new tail lights. I mean, you have to go in and learn how to fly that airplane.
The H model were bigger wings, not bigger wings. I'm sorry, bigger engines.
On the same airframe and everything.
Same.
Just
Well, no,
most of the
it
time?
was the very first ones, the first 12 that were built, first 12 H models, were an E model fuselage with H model wings, and the plumbing was all different in the wings, and it was a different airplane, but it wasn't a full H model until they started the next year, and they had the H model fuselage and the wing, which had 2 air conditioning units, which was heaven for us who are used to having the AC unit in the back, and it pumped it, up. And one AC unit covered the whole thing. Well, now then we had 2 AC packs, and it made a lot of difference. And but when I got to St. Joe, it was an A model, 54, 55, and 56 model airplanes that they got out of the boneyard. They'd been given to Vietnamese. They recovered them from Vietnam, brought them back to the boneyard, and then they lost their KC-97 mission, which was an antiquated, one of the first tankers, and they got the oldest of the old C-130s. They had been refurbished at Hayes, Birmingham, but they were still old
aircraft.
And so that was a total different airplane. That was like going from a 63 or 4 or 5 model car to a Model T, because the electrical systems were different, the hydraulics were different, the engines were smaller. It was just it looked the same, kind of, sort of, but it wasn't.
And on the training school, you were like the co-founder of the training school.
When we first got there, it took me 2 years to get everybody trained up. And I got 500 hours my very first year.
You got 9,000 flight hours.
I finished
now.
with 9,300 in the 130. But after we'd been there, after I got everybody checked out, we went to a thing called Red Flag out in Nellis Air Force Base. And they started letting airlifters participate in that. And there was a place called the Box, which was a classified location out in the middle of the desert, out away from Nellis. No one could fly over that box. And so you had to be real careful. Well, we had 2 different airplanes while we were out there fly through the box. And it was not a good experience.
It wasn't one of yours.
It wasn't me. I saw one of them, and he was our ops officer. And I said,
I'll do all I can for you, but I'm gonna have to turn you in.
But
right?
it's one of those things. When you land, the black cars are out there, and you don't go past go. You get in the black car and you
get
go
debriefed,
and you get debriefed for a while, and supposed to go home. But they had sympathy on us guardsmen. They just didn't get to fly again. While
just
we were there.
at that.
And so when we came home, we got to putting our heads together and says, hey, there's a need for further tactical training. And so we went out and did a class with the A-10s at Tucson. I'm sorry, A-7s at Tucson. It was their fighter weapon school, and they kind of taught us low-level flying, 300 feet, and so forth. And then we came back and we started putting together a synopsis for how we could train for that. And the Guard got in on it. The Guard Bureau got in on it, and they supplied us with the assets to do that. And we actually formed a school, and we had taken one other unit through this school, and we take them through the school. Then we went out to Red Flag and flew with them so that we could see that they were getting what they needed. And after that, that's when I moved.
And the school is still going on.
The school is going on, and it's now an Air Force school, run by the Guard.
Because you think about those C-130s just doing these missions where they take stuff here and take stuff there, but they're in war zones. They're landing on places where you're going to get fire.
You were doing mountain masking, and actually you were doing DACT. Fighter guys know what DACT is. But you were actually doing that with the F-4s and the F-15s. They would come in and pick you up, and you had to maneuver to try to keep them being hit. And C-130 is pretty maneuverable, especially when you slow it down. You can outturn an F-15 or an F-4 any day. But that doesn't mean they, for guns, they can still get you with missile. But guns, they can never get a gunshot on us.
You were talking about low level at 300 feet.
300 feet,
And then there's
200,
low level.
230 knots
Okay.
typically. And, but that school now has, like I say, it's the equivalent to fighter weapon school
Okay.
for the C-130 community.
And while you were at that unit, that's when you went to Chad?
Yes, we actually, my last year there, we got a phone call and said that Chad was at war with Gaddafi in Libya at the time. And they said that the foreign military sales is giving an airplane to Chad. And it's going to be one of your 54 models, one of our oldest. And we need somebody to fly it over. And we'd like to have an instructor. And so
You raised your hand.
my hand kind of went up, and we were supposed to just take it over, drop it off, and leave. But I kind of read between the lines because it was coordinated by the Army. No offense to Army folks, but they assured us that all of the tech manuals and everything would be there, and there'd be a crew there to train them. But I made sure that I had an instructor in every position. And so when we got there, there wasn't any manuals, there wasn't any tech support, wasn't anybody there to teach them anything. So I ended up giving, they were a Zaire crew that had flown H models at Little Rock. And they come and, like I say, this is going back to a Model T because all the systems are different. So we gave them a 2-day ground school and 5 flights. And I think I told you my very first day that I went there, I'd been to Red Flag, so I had a white T-shirt that had red rings around it and a bullseye on the back that said Red Flag. Well, when we were en route to Chad, the airplane had been stripped of all of our markings, and we had to wear civilian clothes. So we landed in civilian clothes, and they told us just to wear shorts and tennis shoes, and so I had a pair of red coaching shorts, white shirt, and white socks with a little ring around it. And I stepped into their air base there that was surrounded by concertina wires and everybody carrying AK-47s, and these little short guys that were different color, and I'm about a foot taller. Walking around everywhere with a literal bullseye on my back. And I couldn't get home quick enough to change clothes. And those particular clothes never surfaced again. But we did fly in shorts and T-shirts and tennis shoes because it was hot. It was in Chad. Jamina, Chad is right next to Libya, and it's in the middle of the desert. And
no AC.
Not much. And then I told Rick also, one of our last flights, I had to train these guys to make short field landings in the desert or in an unimproved airport. So whoever the premier was or whatever that they were, that was the ruler at the time, his wife had a cousin or somebody in one of the villages about 100 miles away, and it would make a good landing spot. So we took her and her group down to this little airstrip in the middle of nowhere. And basically all it was a road that had ruts in it from Cessna's landing and so forth. And it was totally unimproved. And when we got there, because there was no tower or anything, when we got there, I did a low approach to get the sheep and goats off of the area there. They were everywhere. Scattered the sheep and goats, got them out of the way, came back in and landed on this little strip. And right at the end of it was a picket fence. And all of the village people came out. I had no clue who I was or what I was.
They hadn't had a
They'd never seen
C-130
an
land.
airplane like that before. And the chieftain in the little village came out with his robe on and all, but with two marshalling sticks. And I left the airplane running. I wasn't about to shut it down. We left it running, offloaded those, came back, and then I let my student make another landing, and then we took off and came home.
Man, you're
Yeah.
brave.
And well, I mean, he was a
Lucky to be
qualified. I mean,
alive.
he'd already been trained to, you know, you have to train.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. So that was, I left there that winter and came to Dallas, and I transferred to the Texas Air National Guard, doing the same thing. And I spent 6 years in the Air Force and 27 plus in the Air National Guard, 21 of them, almost 21 of them in the Dallas unit. And then I went to my third airplane, which was a B model. I went from an E to an H to a A, now I'm back to a B model, and which I'd never flown before. It was a little bit different than the E. Flew the B model, and then in 85, we got new C-130 H2s, and I got to go to Marietta and pick up one of them.
A brand new one?
Brand new
Okay.
one. We had 8 of them.
Still had the dealer sticker on the window? And
Just about. It certainly smelled new,
I was
like a
saying,
new
the
car.
New car smell.
And so we got those, and then flew those, and then we went to Desert Storm in 90-91.
we got some pictures of
Aged
you,
the airplane significantly,
uh,
flying
of-
out of the dirt and the
of
sand.
your fort there, Fort Texas and Desert Storm.
That's
Was that-
right.
Where was that at? In
It
Saudi?
was in Al Ain,
Okay.
UAE. It was just out. It was about 5 or 6 miles outside of Al Ain. They were building a new airport, and basically all they had in was it's either a 10 or 12,000 foot runway itself, and they were building the terminal, but they shut all that down and they gave that to us. We ended up with 43 C-130s at this forward
That's a
operating
lot
location.
of C-130s.
That is a lot of
Sure
fun.
is.
43 C-130s with we had 5 different squadrons there. 4 of them from the Guard and 1 active duty. And then the South Koreans came over with a couple of airplanes, 2 or 3 airplanes, because they wanted in on the experience. And it was kind of toward the end of Desert Storm.
One of the experience you had was riding on a camel too, wasn't it?
Well, you couldn't spend time in the desert without coming home riding on a camel. Everybody had to experience that. So yes, we did that.
Did you go to the camel races?
Never saw the
Oh my
camel
gosh, the
races.
funniest thing I ever saw. Camel races. Oh my goodness.
We were kind of in the middle of the desert, but between the coast here and the coast over here. So
And then you've got a picture here of you standing in the front of the door with a Texas flag on it. So
that was each individual. I mean, each crew had their own tent. The air crew did, and then maintenance was, a little bit different. But each crew had and stayed together as a crew, and it was a tent, and I'm not ashamed to say it was air conditioned. It had a heat
Don't
pump.
go there.
It was air
Air
conditioned.
Force.
Don't go there.
well, the Army's was heated, right?
Right. But it was 100, anywhere from 100 to 110 degrees outside,
My
and
goodness.
it would keep it to about 80, 85 in the summer, and that was cool after you walk from outside inside.
Right.
And you got to take the vice president.
Yeah, toward the well, actually, it was before Kuwait was liberated. He was exiled to an air base in southern Saudi, and so I had the privilege of being the one that got to go down and pick him up at Jeddah and take him down for about a 4 or 5 hour visit with the emir, and then I brought him back to Jeddah. And so Dan Quayle rode with us up on the flight deck. Very, very easy guy to talk to, very genuine. We had a good little visit, just in the airplane flying and talking.
Right.
And that was an interesting flight. Also,
But it
it
was
a classified flight. I couldn't tell my wife and them. We stayed in a hotel at Jeddah that was a palace hotel, no cost for anything. Pick up the phone, call home, tell them you want to call home, go down. You could eat anything you wanted. There was no price for anything. It was the King's Palace Hotel. And I called my wife the night before I was to fly vice president, and my youngest son was at home, and I couldn't tell him what I was going to do, but I said something about a little bird. Well, my son Mark picked up on it real quick, but he couldn't tell me. Dad, I think I know what you're doing. But that's all I could say. And that was the same thing when I went to Chad. It was classified, and I was gone for 2 weeks without my family even knowing where I was.
Oh, my goodness.
Until there was an article that came out in the paper that said that there was a C-130 that had been given to the Chadian government, and then she knew where it was. But
And then we've got another picture of you flying over the burning oil fields in Kuwait.
that was in Kuwait. We made several missions in and out of the airfield at Kuwait, and after it was kind of liberated, you got some pics also of me carrying a tank.
Yeah.
And we were deployed to King Fahd Air Base in Saudi for a 5 or 6 day round the clock. Every 15 minutes or so, there was an airplane taking off for 5 days, I think it was. And we were hauling. Our particular mission was going into a little place called Rafah out in Saudi, right next to the desert, for Kuwait in Iraq. And we went in around the clock offloading supplies there for the Schwarzkopf end around, where they went across the desert and cut off the Republican Guard. We hauled 52 tanks.
Those are pretty heavy.
They were 52,000 pounds or so.
Barely squeeze in there.
If you see the picture, there's Loadmaster could not go between the tanks at all. He had to go over the top.
Oh my gosh.
So
you could tell you had to load whenever you were taking off.
And our normal operating weight is 155,000 pounds, fully loaded, but wartime weight's 165, and we were 164 almost every time we took off. And so we haul tanks, we haul Humvees with stingers on them, all kinds of special ops folks, waiting for that. And then Schwarzkopf raised the flag, and away they went and cut off the guard.
And then you came home, and Nita was there with her flag.
I came home. She was there waving her flag, and she was an amazing support for me all the way through. And,
still is.
She's still amazing support. She's involved in a little bit of everything. She gives her time and effort. She's a seamstress. She does all kinds of things for our church, for plays and so forth. She's a pretty amazing lady. Put up with me and all that I do.
And another mission you went on was to Brazil.
I went to this was while I was in Dallas. We partnered with the Brazilian Air Force. We took 2 airplanes, 40 people, and went down and flew. We were there for 10 days, flying out of Rio de Janeiro. Tough place to operate out of, but we flew five days with the Brazilians, and flew in formation. And I had one of the things that I told them as kind of the mission commander. I says, I need a picture of me with the Christ statue. And so that's what
Christ
you see.
the Redeemer statue.
And so I got
Cool.
that's me in the airplane, and
Oh, that's awesome.
so I got a picture of that before we came home.
Very cool.
And your whole family, most of them, are doing what you did, serving our country.
There's a picture there of my son when I got home from Desert Storm. He was his first year at Howard Payne. Well, he decided right after that he wanted to join the Guard. And that picture is of me enlisting him in front of a C-130. And he went on to, when he went into Aeroport enlisted in the airport. And after he finished college, he went to nav school, officer school and nav school, became a navigator. And he's now in his 31st year with the 136.
Then we have a picture of you still in your uniform and him in his uniform.
Right. There's a picture of us standing side by side that's before I retired. And then we have a couple of pics of him coming home from one of his deployments, probably Iraqi Freedom,
yeah,
with him and my son and my wife. And all of my family have in some way been involved with the military. My son, now been 31 years, his name is Wayne. And my other son, Mark, who's in the Airpower Council.
He's on the board with us.
He was not able to join the Guard because of spina bifida, but he's got two kids. His oldest one is Trinity, and there's a picture there of me holding her when she was about 2 years old at the most, and then a picture of me swearing her in 2 years ago into the Guard.
So it's kind of that group shot where you've got all the pictures
Mm-hmm.
there.
And I'm swearing her in. And then that was a year and a half ago. And last summer, she finally got to go to basic training in the middle of nursing school. And she just stayed with her nursing school and did basic training. And she's getting married this coming Saturday.
Is she really?
She's getting married this coming Saturday. And her younger brother is in ROTC, and he's going to A&M to be in the cadets.
And he was
Awesome.
he
Best
was
college ever.
they did the colors at the Christmas
At
party.
our
Airpower
Christmas party.
Christmas
That was
party.
his ROTC
Yeah.
group, and he was a part of that.
Very cool.
And so you retired, and now you just don't do anything, do you?
Well, I
Like all of us.
somehow managed to stay a little busy.
You're on the board for the
I'm
Granbury
I'm
Airport.
on the Granbury Regional Airport Board as chairman. I've
Got a
I
new
was a flight
runway.
instructor there for quite a while. I still do some flight instruction, but I haven't lately.
You had a little crash too, didn't you?
I had an airplane accident almost 12 years ago on takeoff. It was a light sport. Started losing fuel pressure. Had to put it down on the ground off the end of the runway, and it stalled in a landing position about 20 feet above the ground, and it just pancaked in, sheared the nose wheel off, landed under my seat, and so I not only landed hard, but I landed on a rock. 3.5 weeks in the hospital. It blew out my back from L1 and 2, and a 10.5-hour surgery put me back together again with a jack, actually between L1 and 2, rods and pins. And 3.5 weeks later, I walked out and walked up my stairs to my house
My
to
goodness.
go to my bedroom. So I've been extremely blessed.
You've done a lot of flying in your time, haven't you?
I've got about 2,000 hours of civilian time. Most of it's instructor. But
And you're very involved in your church.
I am. I'm a deacon. I'm not active at the moment, but I'm involved in our food bank program at the church. Several other things that's going on. The Airpower Council, advisory to board on Holidays and Heroes, and then I play golf.
And at your church, Malcolm Yarnell, he's still
Right.
there?
Malcolm is still there.
Okay.
He's
a pretty
teaching
good
pastor.
He's a pretty good theologian, isn't he?
He's a pretty good theologian. I wear a hat that says "Live blessed."
Yeah,
And
indeed.
I have been blessed.
You have.
Yeah, and Warren Morrison, one of the World War II veterans that went to Pearl Harbor a couple of years ago, he lives in Granbury.
He lives down the street from
And
me.
Jackie has been really great about visiting with him and bringing him where he can. Because, when he came back from Pearl Harbor, and I had met Warren before, obviously when COVID hit, we didn't get to see a lot of the folks because some of the World War II guys weren't coming out very much. But when he went on that Pearl Harbor trip, he made the comment to one of the attendants that, I get to go back to Granbury, and I'm just gonna sit there in my house and be all alone all the time. I'll never see anybody again. And because he really loved that trip to Pearl Harbor, you know, as most of those guys do, they get a lot of attention and they get fawned over and everything. And you know, and then when we had the big lunch on base, Jackie brought Warren, and it was so good to see him.
I've brought him the last 2 years.
Yeah.
That's
Because
good.
he just lives a block down the street
Yeah.
from me. And he's
And down there in Granbury, where you live, Dave DeCorver, Ben, that's such a good neighborhood.
it's an
You know,
extremely
there's
good
a lot of
neighborhood.
good people down there.
And Hood County itself is we're blessed to live in Hood County, where in God we trust is in all the first responders vehicles. And we have a great sheriff's department or police department, city managers. Some of them go to our church. But we're like any small town. We have our political issues, as anybody does. But
and you have a good Daughters of American Revolution.
we have a great
Elizabeth,
DAR.
Crockett.
I had the privilege of receiving their Distinguished Citizen Award 3 or 4 years ago, and that was quite an honor from Kathy, and it was given to me over in I don't know, one of the hotels in Dallas, and that was as cherished award as just any that I do have.
You got a few.
Well, I've got a few, but if you live long enough in the military, you're going to get a few.
That's right. That's right.
Well, we thank you for being here. I mean, we dug deep, but we didn't dig as deep as we could have. We had a little more time, but
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity
the
to share.
136 Airlift Wing.
Mhm.
They're very involved down on the border. We
They
had
are.
Misty
Cato.
Cato. She's a retired major from there.
Mhm.
She'd been down at the border, but we have a lot of stuff going on down there from just out here at NAS JRB.
The 136 at one time had about 200 people there.
Yeah.
And I think they may have more than that now, because as of a week ago, they had a couple of airplanes that was just flying back and forth, and they had 200 people that was serving feet on the ground, boots on the ground, so to speak, on the border. And we had our band members. Our band is pretty well decimated because they only had 35 members or so, and 18 or 20 of them were deployed to the border.
Yeah, that's why we had a small group for the luncheon, was because the vast majority of them.
And they didn't sign up to
Go
carry
down
to be a security person.
Yeah.
That is their secondary FSC, but that's not what they train for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They train to play their instruments.
And
We
as
appreciate them
Misty-
being there.
Right, and as Misty told us, some of us spent time in the active duty and in the reserve, and those are both federal, whereas when you're in the Guard, that is a state, and so there are benefits that you do not get, and there are ways that it affects your federal civil service employment that are negative, and there are so many things, and those guys serving in the Guard down there on that border, we really got to be praying for them and helping them out. And, let's get some care. We're going to do some care packages to get down there. I've got the first sergeant's address, and then we're going to get some of those set up for them, because they're, it's not like being in Kuwait and Iraq and Afghanistan and all those other places where, you got everybody and his brother sending you care packages. But these guys are really in some really nasty circumstances, those that are boots on the ground on the border. And we need to show our love to those guys, because being state funded is a whole other ball game, as Misty came on the show and explained to us in pretty uncertain terms.
It is different.
It is
Yeah.
difficult task.
Yeah, they are there, and even more so now.
Well, thank you for being here. With Airpower, we've got a benefit coming up next month. Joe Tees, you can go to the Fort Worth Airpower Council website, and there's a place there that you can find out more about it. We're going to have these musicians, or they're songwriters. A couple of them are local. Several of them are coming in from Nashville. So it's going to be a good evening. We've got a golf tournament the 15th of October for roll call. So there's a lot of stuff.
Clay shoot.
Oh, clay shoot, yeah. I knew it was some kind of benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of golf tournaments coming up. 'Tis the season.
I've
for
got
golf
one Friday.
tournaments.
Friday is
Yeah,
the
one
Marine one.
Friday.
Yeah.
Right.
So a lot of stuff going on, but
Yeah.
Well, life gets busy for all of
it
us.
does, especially when you retire.
When you're retired, and I'll spend the next 2.5 months in Colorado.
You always send me a lot of pictures.
It's a tough life when you
It
get to go
is.
where it's
It
a little
is.
cooler,
It
right?
is.
It is.
Jackie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you
for
very much.
sharing your story about how you were a plowboy and became a flyboy. Only in Texas, and only in America. Right?
Like I said, I have been blessed.
Yeah.
Larry, bicycle stuff's
Coming up,
coming up. We got the boxing in Cowtown coming up. What day is that?
June 24th.
June 24th.
We
Old
just
South.
signed Rudy Smedley. He's a 5-time world champion martial arts. So
Gonna have
we've got 4 or 5
a lot of world champions.
who are gonna be there.
Absolutely.
Nice.
And then we have the 11th birthday,
10th
10th.
annual
Okay.
birthday, July 29th at the Point
Okay.
on Lake Worth, 10 to 2.
We've got a lot of stuff in the boxing world. I think in June, Kendrick Rutherford, he's got an amateur show, and then he's got another professional.
Kendrick
Sure,
is igniting this
He's doing
boxing,
good.
so
I'm proud of him.
I hope we can join in and help get it back. I fought 9 years, and we used to fill Will Rogers every single night.
Now we get 150 people if we're lucky.
The 2 years ago, the state finals Saturday night, I spoke at Angelo's that day and drew a bigger crowd than the state finals
Yeah.
drew.
It's gone down, not like it used to be.
Yeah.
But thank you, Larry, for hosting
Thank
us.
y'all.
Just remember Classic Auto Detail and come down here and take a tour of the museum.
Yes.
Dusty and Tyler, thank y'all. Y'all did a good job. And we'll see you next week on Hometown Heroes.
Okay.